Here, bullet. If a body is what you want, then here is bone and gristle and flesh. Here is the clavicle snapped wish, the aorta's open valves, the leap thought makes at the synaptic gap. Here is the adrenaline rush you crave, that inexorable flight, that insane puncture into heat and blood. And I dare you to finish what you've started, because here, bullet, here is where I complete the word you bring hissing through the air. Here is where I moan the barrel's cold esophagus, triggering my tongue's explosives for the rifling I have inside of me. Each twist of the round spun deeper, because here, bullet, here is where the world ends every time. I wrote that poem in February of 2004. I was there we crossed the border from Kuwait on the 3rd of December 2003, and we were in country until just before Halloween of 2004. And I wrote this poem in February of 2004. It was snowing in Mosul. Did you guys know it snowed in Mosul? Some of you do. I didn't know it snowed there. I'm glad we brought the winter gear, you know, because it was cold. And I don't know how you guys feel hearing that poem. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Right? I still think it's kind of an odd poem myself, and I still don't quite completely understand it. And that's one of the good things about poetry as well, is if there's something you can take away from it, but at the same time, if you turn the page, there seems like there should be a reason to turn back to it again, or carry it with you, or memorize it, that type of thing. I folded that poem up and I put it in a Ziploc bag, and I carried it in my front pocket the rest of the time that I was in country, which sometimes I ask if there's any psych majors, maybe afterwards we can, you know, convene and talk about that stuff, you know. So it's cool. You guys can laugh, you guys can talk, we can, you know, have maybe a bit of a conversation or two, but I'm not just going to shout poems at you all night, I promise you, you know. So some come from different places, you know what I mean? So before going to Iraq, I was with the 3rd Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division. We were a striker brigade, and if you guys have seen these, right, in the Army commercials with the cage that come around them and stuff, yeah, right? And it was the first time that one of those types of brigades had been deployed to a combat zone. And before we went into a theater. It was nothing like this house. Man, you guys gotta look at this place, you know? It was about half the size, and we had a series of briefings with different officers like yourselves eventually, right, coming up and telling us about different things we need to consider, or mine awareness, health issues, stuff like that. At one point, this Iraqi gentleman came up and he talked to us about different cultural customs, some phrase words and how to pronounce them, that kind of thing. And I wrote this poem when I was in Iraq because, of course, what he told us was very useful, but we learned more as we were in country. And there's a quote from Rousseau which says, "To yield to force is an act of necessity, not of will. It is at best an act of prudence." What every soldier should know. If you hear gunfire on a Thursday afternoon, it could be for a wedding or it could be for you. Always enter a home with your right foot. The left is for cemeteries and unclean places. Oguf tara armik is rarely useful. It means stop or I'll shoot. Sabah al-khair is effective. It means good morning. Inshallah means Allah be willing. Listen well when it is spoken. You will hear the RPG coming for you. Not so the roadside bomb. There are bombs under the overpasses, in trash piles, in bricks, in cars. There are shopping carts with clothes soaked in foo gas, a sticky gel of homemade napalm. Parachute bombs and artillery shells sewn into the carcasses of dead farm animals. Graffiti sprayed under the overpasses. I will kill you, American. Men wearing vests rigged with explosives walk up, raise their arms, and say, Inshallah. There are men who earn $80 to attack you, $5,000 to kill. Small children who will play with you, old men with their talk, women who offer chai. And any one of them may dance over your body tomorrow. It's hard not to get jaded, you know what I mean? When you can't trust a kid, a 12-year-old kid. And yet at the same time, we're supposed to make friends with the people. You know? Which hand? You can't take your firing hand off your weapon. You shake hand with the other hand. in essence, you know. when I was, we convoyed up, we crossed the border from Kuwait into Iraq, and we convoyed up past Baghdad. Stayed there a couple of months, and then we, in a small town called Balad, which is off the Tigris River. And then we moved up north in January of 2004, and we stayed near the end, pushing into February. We stayed up in Mosul for a couple of months. Then there was an uprising in the spring of 2004. We moved back down to Baghdad. We lived north and south of the city, and I was part of this mission where we'd have like 90 or so, 80 to 90 18-wheelers. It was a loggerhead formation of supply trucks, and we would get in between them, and we would escort them through the city of Baghdad, stay the night, and then do the process back and forth, day and night, you know what I mean, each day. And then we were replaced, and we went back up to Mosul, and we finished out our time up there before flying home. But while in Mosul, there were mortars that we thought were being fired from in the middle of the river. The Tigris cuts through that city as well, and there's an island there with a Ferris wheel, and in good times, they're like Christmas tree lights kind of thing, strung around the Ferris wheel, and there were little snack bars on the shoreline, and there was a footbridge that used to go across to the island itself. So people would take little boats out there, and then there are little shops and stuff. People would smoke from hookahs. They would smoke tobacco and drink like Turkish coffee and stuff, and bang on drums, and they would just BS with each other and hang out and stuff on their days off or whatnot. But we thought that there were fishermen, supposedly fishermen, sneaking out to this island and lobbing mortars onto one of our local bases. So we sent a squad out on a longboat or a john boat, and this poem comes from that, and it's called Ferris Wheel. A helicopter went down in the river last night, hitting a power line slung a few feet off the river. They were searching for survivors and bodies from a boat capsized earlier, Americans and Iraqis both. It's dawn now, and the sky drifts low and flat and cold, the way search boats on the Tigris drift further and further downriver. When Navy divers bring the body of an Iraqi policeman, it will be a man we aren't searching for, and still another later in the day, a college student from Kirkuk. It would be a long week of searching like this, every morning near the shoreline restaurant, where open fires are fed kindling and tender, a cook's hands lifting the silver bodies of fish, weighing them on scales. The history books will get it wrong. There will be nothing written about the island Ferris wheel, frozen by rust like a broken clock, or about the pilot floating unconscious downriver, sparks fading above as his friends swam toward him instead of the shore. How both would drown in this cold and unstoppable river. After that happened, well, as the boat initially, the one that went out with the squad and a couple Iraqi policemen, the river itself is very deceiving. It's a big flat river, looks kind of lazy, but it is deceiving. And they have a lot of weight and a lot of gear on them, right? So it tipped over, they went in, and we sent squad and companies down on each side of the river to basically protect while Navy divers went looking for these guys. But initially, the first reacting troops came down to protect the side, and the colonel called in these scout helicopters to try to skim over the surface of the water to try to find these guys drifting. Maybe they're alive, or maybe they're dead, but we got to get them, you know? And it was coming on nightfall, and sadly, you couldn't see these low-slung wires across the river. And they hit it and slammed into the water. And some of the guys I talked to from another platoon, they said that they saw the pilot, and they were yelling to him, and he knew that, it seemed like he knew that if they threw the rope to him, they'd be able to save him. But he went after his buddy instead, who was floating in front of him. And they found him later, found both of them. It took about a week or so for us to find some of the other soldiers we were looking for and the police officers. But it was weird, this river, they'd pull up a body of a police officer, because we were looking for some Iraqi police officers. It's not the one we're looking for. Hit on the head, thrown in the river. College student pulled up, hit on the head and thrown in the river. There's a lot of bodies in these rivers, So I think Mr. Jannetta was right. This is like, well, this sucks, and this sucks, and it's difficult. And I apologize that there isn't much humor, because there was a lot of humor when I was there, but it's not in this book. And well, we'll see what we can do about that. But for now, I'm going to have another sad kind of poem, So And you guys are like, man, we only got like, what, 4 lessons left? If you could just take it easy on us so we can get out here. You got 2 months of leave coming up, some of you, right? Cool. Good for you. Actually, I'll clap for you, man, because you guys have worked hard. You deserve it, you know? I hope you enjoy it, you know? It's, I'm from the Army, so this is difficult for me to do, but I thought in honor of all of you, I'll wear blue tonight, you know? So. And I was a sergeant, so this is a very unique opportunity. Not often does a sergeant get to talk to officers and they have to kind of be quiet and listen, you know? This is cool. This is a very remarkable moment in my life. So, but we're up in Mosul, in the northern city of Iraq, and there's Dohuk a little bit further up, but it's near the top of Iraq. There's about 2.5 million people live in the city. There's like a bad part of town, and there's a university district. There are big parks and stuff. And there's one of Saddam's former palaces. If you convert it from the Arabic into English, it's basically like the Palace of Swords. That's the idea. And we used to go there. Sometimes we'd go there. At one point, we were escorting one of the provincial governors around town as she was doing business, and with different leaders and things. And we loved to go there because sometimes she wouldn't be ready to go yet. She's talking to somebody, and we could sneak over to the chow hall because the colonel lived there, and he had they had catered desserts there, you know. So we'd sneak in the chow hall, get some catered desserts, and I don't know, life seemed good. And as you'd walk in, it was nothing like, what's it, Mitch's Hall or Mitchell? What's it called? I mean, you guys got a phenomenal thing going on there. It was nothing like that kind of scale, you know, but it was still several hundred soldiers could go in and feed at the same time. And there was an American soldier who was in my unit, my battalion. She was a cook, and she would sit there, and as each of us walked in, she would click us in. Why does she do that? Why do you guys think she did that? Come on, you guys are smart. You can come up with a guess, right? What's that? Yeah, exactly. Said to charge us later because Halliburton, Brown and Root needs to know how many meals to charge for. You got to keep track of this stuff, man. You know, it's money. But one of her other jobs was as a 50 caliber machine gunner on cargo trucks that would ferry food sometimes out to outlying bases like the one I used to stay at. And while she was on one of these missions, this poem comes from that. It's called A.B. Negative, the Surgeon's Poem. Thalia Fields lies under a gray ceiling of clouds, just under the turbulence, with anesthetics dripping from an IV into her arm. And the flight surgeon says the shrapnel cauterized as it traveled through her here, breaking this rib as it entered, burning a hole through the left lung to finish in her back. And all of this she doesn't hear, except perhaps as music, that faraway music of people's voices when they speak gently and with care, a comfort to her on a stretcher in a flying hospital en route to Landstuhl, just under the rain at midnight. And Thalia drifts in and out of consciousness as a nurse dabs her lips with a moist towel, her palm on Thalia's forehead, her vitals slipping some, as burned flesh gives way to the heat of blood, the tunnels within opening to fill her, just enough blood to cough up and drown in. Thalia sees shadows of people working to save her, but cannot feel their hands, cannot hear them any longer. And when she closes her eyes, the most beautiful colors rise in darkness. Tangerine washing into Russian blue, with the droning engine humming on and a dragonfly's wings. Island palms painting the sky an impossible hue with their thick brushes dripping green. Which is a way of dealing with the fact that Thalia Fields is gone, long gone. About as far from Mississippi as she can get. 10,000 feet above Iraq with a blanket draped over her body and an exhausted surgeon in tears, his bloodied hands on her chest, his head sunk down, the nurse guiding him to a nearby seat and holding him as he cries, though no one hears it, because nothing can be heard where pilots fly in blackout, the plane like a shadow guiding the rain, here in the droning engines of midnight. I was at the Virginia Military Institute, and I read that poem there. And afterwards, a gentleman walked up in civilian clothes and stuff, and he introduced himself as her battalion commander. He said, "That's about so-and-so, right?" Because I changed the name. It's not her name in the poem. And I was surprised, because I don't know what she was thinking when she died. island palms, painting, this act of the imagination and stuff. And he told me, he said the last words that she said to him as he put her on this bird was, go get those bastards, which is those are tough Hollywood lines to write, You could pay good money in Hollywood to write a line like that. Go get those bastards, But I would ask you, that's the last note of your life. Is that how you want to leave the world? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. So, for what it's worth. How you guys doing over on the wings there, man? Yeah? All right. Right on. There's nobody up there. I was wondering if people are going to be up there, like throwing stuff down or something, but nothing, So. The 107s have a crackling sound of fire and electricity, of air-ruckled heat. And when they pinwheel over the rooftops of Haman al-Alil, they just keep going, traveling for years over the horizon to land in the meridians of Divisadero Street, where I'm standing early one morning on a Memorial Day in Fresno, California, which is where I'm from. The Veterans Parade scattering at the impact, mothers shielding their children by instinct, old war vets crouching behind automobiles as police set up an outer cordon for the unexploded ordnance. Rockets often fall in the night sky of the skull, down long avenues of the brain's myelin sheathing, over synapses and the rough structures of thought. They fall into the hippocampus, into the seat of memory, where lovers and strangers and old friends entertain themselves, unaware of the dangers headed their way, or that I will need to search among them the way the bomb disposal tech walks tethered and alone down Divisadero Street, suited up as if walking on the moon's surface, as the crowd watches just how determined he is to dismantle death, to take it apart piece by piece. The bravest thing I've ever seen. That's probably another poem you're like, what the hell is going on with that, right? Yeah? Because it starts off with this rocket flying over. I was in August of 2004, I was sitting in this base, and we had a Katyusha rocket fly over, and they're notoriously inaccurate, and this one fortunately was as well. But I don't know if you guys use the same jargon, but we called it a significant emotional event, Big-ass rocket flying over your head, missing you, Boom, blows out in the desert, And that started me thinking about this poem. And then in the middle of August, and it was, trust me, it was hot. I'm sure some of you have experienced, I'm from California, but I never experienced this kind of heat before. But we were called up because there was a roadside bomb in the middle of the city of Mosul, out in the suburbs. Went there, we blocked off foot and vehicle traffic on this long boulevard. In England, they might call it a dual carriageway. There were, 2 lanes one way, a meridian, 2 lanes. Housing on both sides, multi-story housing with balconies and stuff. We put some snipers on the rooftops. Helicopters are flying overhead. And Iraqis, like me, are curious. And so they're on their balconies. And I'm looking back myself, wondering what this guy's going to do, because he's in this crazy, bomb suit, this moon suit thing. And he's tied with a white tether. And another soldier's, unspooling him out as he walks towards his bomb. What's the tether for? Huh? I'm like, shit, dude. You're gonna, he's walking out to the bomb, But that's really not what the poem is about, The poem says in the beginning, it says that these things are flying over the rooftops of the city, and they just keep going to land here, in us, or in you in the future, maybe, That there's this explosive material we will carry when we come home from combat. And we'll have to diffuse death within us as we try to live our lives in a healthy way back home. Right? Maybe there's tens of thousands or much more, many veterans coming back in waves that will need a lot of help. So if you ever find ways where maybe I can help, this isn't just a poetry reading kind of thing. I'm saying Brian, me, in Fresno or wherever I am, I can be reached through my publisher. You can email through the publisher, Alice James Books, or whatever publisher. Google me, you'll see whatever publishers I have. Contact me, and if you know of some way where I can help veterans coming home, let me know, and I'll see what I can do. all right? And if you can do that with each other, it's necessary work, needs to be done. No. No. This next poem I'm going to read, I stopped reading. I used to read this every single place I went. I read it in Germany with a translator reading it for me in German. Augsburg, Germany. It was cool. But I read it for this particular reason. When my unit came back from Iraq, the 3rd Stryker Brigade, it was up in Fort Lewis, Washington, and unlike how it usually is when it's raining and stuff, it was a sunny day. This is right around Halloween of 2004. And we're out on the parade field, clean uniforms, bayonets affixed. The colonel's up and there's like bleachers, seating for family, friends, some of the generals of the post coming out, that kind of thing. Reporters, balloons, you know. And the colonel comes up and gives a speech, and it's one of these speeches from an enlisted guy's point of view. It was sort of like, "You have been on the vanguard of freedom's frontier." You know, like, like, come on, man, you know. He's got to do his thing, you know. He's got his bosses looking at him and stuff. It's cool, you know. But it's at one point, though, he does have a moment where he says, "I want to ask a moment of silence from everyone as I list the names of those who did not come back home with us." And I listened. And as he completed that list, I realized that he hadn't said the name of Private Miller, Private First Class Bruce Miller, I was in 3rd Squad Alpha Team, and he was in 2nd Squad Bravo Team. He's a machine gunner. He's from New Jersey. And right? Shout out to New Jersey, right? So I read this poem because I read this poem for a long time because I felt like his name had been erased as an American citizen from the list. And I knew that war had driven him to this point, right? Because he committed suicide. But it seemed like because he didn't die under the warrior ethos, maybe his name was erased. I don't know. I don't know that colonel's reason. But it seemed to me a fundamental injustice to an American citizen. But after a while, I became so tired of reading this poem and resurrecting Miller just to kill him again. You know, it became a burden, and I stopped doing it. But I just now started again to read it because I've been reading about some of the suicide rates among veterans returning home, which are very high. I'm not going to say what they are. I'd encourage you to find this stuff out for yourself, because these are going to be some of the soldiers that work for you. It's a hidden cost of the war. And if you're thinking in terms of how much pain the enemy is inflicting on us, right? We have to factor this in. How well are we connecting with these people and keeping them alive? For what it's worth, right? Here's the poem. Eulogy. It happens on a Monday at 11:20 a.m. as tower guards eat sandwiches and seagulls drift by on the Tigris River. Prisoners tilt their heads to the west, though burlap sacks and duct tape blind them. The sound reverberates down concertina coils, though a piano wire thrums when given slack, and it happens like this on a blue day of sun, when Private Miller pulls the trigger to take brass and fire into his mouth. The sound lifts the birds up off the water. A mongoose pauses under the orange trees. And nothing can stop it now, no matter what blur of motion surrounds him, no matter what voices crackle over the radio in static confusion, because if only for this moment the earth is stilled, and Private Miller has found what low hush there is, down in the eucalyptus shade, there by the river. It begins simply with a fist, white-knuckled and tight, glossy with sweat. With 2 eyes and a rearview mirror watching for a convoy, the radio a soundtrack that adrenaline has pushed into silence, replacing it with a heartbeat, his thumb trembling over the button. A flight of gold, that's what Cephon thinks, as he lights a Miami, draws in the smoke, and waits in his taxi at the traffic circle. He thinks of summer 1974, lifting pitchforks of grain high in the air, the slow drift of it like the fall of Shatha's hair. And although it was decades ago, he still loves her, remembers her standing at the canebrake where the buffalo cooled shoulder deep in the water, pleased with the orange cups of flowers he brought her. And he regrets how so much can go wrong in a life, how easily the years slip by, light as grain, bright as the street's concussion of metal, shrapnel traveling at the speed of sound to open him up in blood and shock, a man whose last thoughts are of love and wreckage, with no one there to whisper him gone. Sergeant Ledoux of the National Guard, he speaks but cannot hear the words coming out. And it's just as well his eardrums have ruptured, because it lends the world a certain calm. Though the traffic circle is filled with people running in panic, their legs a blur like horses in a carousel, turning and turning the way the tires spin on the Humvee flipped to its side, the gunner's hatch he was thrown from, a mystery to him now, a dark hole in metal the color of sand. And if he could, he would crawl back inside of it. And though his fingertips scratch at the asphalt, he hasn't the strength to move. Shrapnel has torn into his rib cage, and he will bleed to death in minutes. But he finds himself surrounded by a strange beauty, the shine of light on the broken, a woman's hand touching his face tenderly the way his wife might, amazed to find a wedding ring on his crushed hand, the bright gold sinking in flesh, going to bone. Rashid passes the bridal shop on a bicycle with Sefa beside him. And just before the air ruckles and breaks, he glimpses the sidewalk reflections in the storefront glass, men and women walking and talking or not, an instant of clarity. Just before each of them shatters under the detonation's wave, as if even the idea of them were being completely destroyed, stripped of form. The blast tearing into the mannequins who stood as though husband and wife a moment before, who cannot touch one another, who cannot kiss, who now lie together in glass and debris, holding one another in their half-armed embrace and calling this love, if this is all there will ever be. The civil affairs officer, Lieutenant Jackson, he stares at his missing hands, which make no sense to him, no sense at all, to wave these absurd stumps held in the air where just a moment before he'd blown bubbles out the Humvee window, his left hand holding the bottle, his right hand dipping the plastic ring in soap, filling the air behind them with floating spheres like the oxygen trails of deep ocean divers. Something for the children, something beautiful. Translucent globes with their iridescent skins drifting on vehicle exhaust in the breeze that might lift one day over the Zagros Mountains. That kind of hope. Small globes which may have astonished someone on the sidewalk 7 minutes before Lieutenant Jackson blacks out from blood loss and shock, with no one there to bandage the wounds that would carry him all the way home. Nearby, an old woman cradles her grandson, whispering, rocking him on her knees as though singing him to sleep, her hands wet with their blood, her black dress soaked in it as her legs give out and she buckles with him to the ground. If you'd asked her 40 years earlier if she could see herself, an old woman, begging by the roadside for money, here, with a bomb exploding at the market among all these people, she'd have said, to have your heart broken one last time before dying, to kiss a child given sight of a life he could never live, it's impossible. This isn't the way we die. And the man who triggered the button, who may have invoked the prophet's name or not, he is obliterated at the epicenter. He is everywhere. He is of all things. His touch is the air taken in, the blast and the wave, the electricity of shock. His is the sound the heart makes quick in the panic's rush, the surge of light searching for light and color. That sound the martyr cries, filled with the word his soul is made of, Inshallah! It's still hanging in the air over Asher Square. The telephone line snapped in two, crackling a strange incantation the dead hear, as they wander confused amongst one another, trying to learn each other's names, trying to comfort the living in their grief, to console those who cannot accept such random pain, speaking Habib, softly, one to another there in the rubble and debris, Habib, over and over, that it might not be forgotten. It just seemed to me that when you read reports of roadside bombs, that wasn't what was happening what I was reading. Does that make any sense? Roadside bomb in Ramadi, 31 killed, 14 injured. Marketplace bomb in Bakuba, 4 killed, 22 wounded. What the hell is that all about? Does it tell us anything? a sex poem. Is that cool? I'll do a pseudo sex poem kind of thing. It's a war sex poem, so it's not cool. I can promise that. So. This won't be embarrassing at all. Yeah, crap. Last night's dream, and it's for the goddess Ishtar, who's the goddess of love and war, right? And one thing to keep in mind, I wrote these poems when I was in Iraq. I'd come back to the base when I had time, and I would write in my notebooks, my journals, mostly diary entries. Sometimes poems would come up out of it. And then when I was writing this poem, I wasn't thinking about me, particularly with someone back home. I was thinking more about the intimacy between America and Iraq, forged by war. So, last night's dream. In the dream, her breasts become confused in my lips. I shoot an azimuth to her navel while her fingertips touch me with concussions, as if explosives rang through the nerves of my body, as if I am strung with wire, a huge receiver of UHF radio transmissions, frequency hopping with our tongues as we kiss, and I slide into her with a sound of flashbang grenades that make her eyes cloud over in smoke from the heat of it. In the dream, she kisses Arabic into my skin, and I understand every word of it. I transcribe it backwards into cuneiform and stone. I rename the arteries and veins for every river and wadi, from Dohuk north to Basra south. I feel for this geography of pleasure. My tongue is a marker that writes even in the rain, even in salt and sweat, and I write with it now over every curve and turn of her body. In the dream, our orgasm destroys a nation. It leaves thermite and gunpowder in the air above us, a crackling of radio static as we kiss on, long into the denouement of skin and fire, where medevac helicopters fly in the dark caverns of our lungs in search of the wounded, and we breathe them one to another, a deep rotor wash of pain and bandages. I told you it wasn't a cool sex poem, right? So. Some of you guys are like, well, that one made sense, and then the next poem, but that didn't make any sense at all, man. What the hell's he talking about, you know? I don't know. I'm going to read one more poem that has to do with my time in Iraq, and then I'm going to shift over to a couple new poems I've been writing. They're on the same subject except the war back home. I wrote this poem, though, while I was waiting for someone like you, perhaps, to fly me out of that country on a C-130, you know? And they were coming in we were waiting in this room that was about as big as, a little bit wider than the stages right now with the curtains here. And in the middle, we had our rucksacks all piled up, and the room was about from here to that pylon or the edge of the stage there. And around it, the platoon, about 48 of us. And I remember most of us were sleeping, because the more you could sleep, and I heard this may be true here as well, from somebody, I won't say who, but the more you could sleep, the less time you were actually in Iraq, you know? You've never heard that before, right? So, yeah, but I feel a little bit like Johnny Cash in the prison when he's talking to prisoners a little bit. I don't know what the... But nowhere near as cool. He had the guitar. That guy was cool, you know. So some of the guys were like doing their last-minute push-ups, so they'd have muscles for the girls back home. You can tell I didn't do enough of that, you know. And so others are playing cards, and I was writing this poem the last 2 days I was in Iraq. But I'm writing it as if I'm already on the bird, taking me home, looking back. So, and it's called Night in Blue. At 7,000 feet and looking back, running lights blacked out under the wings, and America waiting. A year of my life disappears at midnight. The sky a deep viridian, the house lights below small as match heads burned down to embers. Has this year made me a better lover? Will I ever understand something of hardship, of loss? Will a lover sense this in my kiss or touch? What do I know of redemption or sacrifice? What will I have to say of the dead? That it was worth it? That any of it made sense? I have no words to speak of war. I never dug the graves in Telefar. I never held the mother crying in Ramadi. And I never lifted my friend's body when they carried him home. I have only the shadows under the leaves to take with me, the quiet of the desert, the low fog of Balad, orange groves with ice forming on the rinds of fruit. I have a woman crying in my ear late at night when the stars go dim. Moonlight and sand is a resonance of the dust of bones, and nothing more. Not exactly a glorious finish, huh? Moonlight and sand as a resonance of the dust of bones and nothing more. So, we do our job, but I would argue there's no glory in it. It's a profession that's hard to take up, and it's a difficult weight to carry. And I appreciate and I respect the weight, but I would encourage you to recognize it for what it is. That's how we doing there, boss? How much? 5? 5 minutes? What's the F word that I want to? 5 minutes? Well, I'll skip ahead here. That's the problem. You'll find this out with your NCOs. We can talk all day long. We are talkers, man. So I'm going to read a poem. If you'll indulge me, I'll try and read 2 poems here. One poem that's really important for me to share here tonight. I went to the, I'll amend this story very short. I went to the VA hospital in Palo Alto, and I had a tour of the facilities as part of a project possibly for the NEA, and they call it a campus, and I was on the TBI ward, or the traumatic brain injury ward, and the administrator there told me that about 20 minutes down the road there's another campus called, they call them, how do I put this, men and women, actually women who've served in Iraq or Afghanistan who've been raped by other service members while there are at this campus, 20 minutes away from the main one. And attached to that is also another campus. The military probably doesn't want to talk about this too much, but we need to talk about this stuff, of men who've also been in the same places, Iraq and Afghanistan, raped by other men. They're all being treated there. This poem is called Insignia. And Awad Nasir once said, "Sleep, for your skin, if you wake, will not be able to bear the sting of arrows." She hides under the deuce and half this time, sleeping on a roll of foam, draped in mosquito netting. Sandflies hover throughout the night. She sleeps under vehicle exhaust and heat, dreaming of mortars sleeping beside her, 3 stripes painted on each cold tube, a rocker of yellow hung below. It's you she's dreaming of, Sergeant. She'll dream of you for years to come, if she makes it out of this country alive, which she probably will. You will be the fire and the hovering breath, not the sniper, not the bomber in the streets, you. And so I'm here to ask for this one night's reprieve. Let her sleep tonight. Let her sleep. Pause a moment here under the stars. Smoke. The gin your wife sent from New Jersey, colored mint green with food dye disguised in a bottle of mouthwash. Take a long swig of it. Take the edge out of your knuckles. Let it blur the stars into a tremor of lights. The explosions in the distance are not your own. In these long hours before dawn, here on the banks of the Tigris River, let her sleep. In her dream, your eyes are pools of rifle oil. You unsheathe the bayonet from its scabbard, and she waits. On a mattress of sand and foam, there in the motor pool, she waits to kiss bullets into your mouth. We have work to do, you know? It's enough to have an enemy firing mortars at us, trying to shoot down planes, trying to shoot down helicopters, putting roadside bombs. We have enough to do already. We need to clean up the house. We need to get rid of this bullshit and stop acting. You'll see. You're going to get deployed at some point. I've heard the story. Oh yeah, she was kind of asking for it, dude. You see how she dresses? See how she looks when she's in chow hall, man? That's fucking bullshit. You know what I'm saying? You hear somebody say that, you better be on them, because this is a problem that's in-house. I imagine my sister joining the military, putting her hand up, going to combat, actively in a place where some people are trying to kill her, and then when she's on the base, somebody else is a predator preying on her. One of us. So if you aren't talking about this, that's a problem. And if you think this is BS, then you have something to fix in your head, because this is a bigger problem than people think. So, sorry to lecture, but it has to be done, you know? So, So I'll read one last poem, and it's not my poem. I got clearance from my boss already, so I think this is still okay. It's a very short poem. Remember the poem I read about the roadside bomb at the traffic circle with all the different people involved? That was 4 pages long. This is in 6-point font, which I hope I can read. It's like one little verse stanza. And it's by Yehuda Amichai. And I think this talks about the effects of war and how we as soldiers and officers and veterans and civilians, all that are in the turmoil of war, the effects of that. I think it's a brilliant poem. It's called The Diameter of the Bomb. The diameter of the bomb was 30 centimeters, and the diameter of its effective range about 7 meters, with 4 dead and 11 wounded. And around these, in a larger circle of pain and time, 2 hospitals are scattered and 1 graveyard. But the young woman who was buried in the city she came from, at a distance of more than 100 kilometers, enlarges the circle considerably. And the solitary man mourning her death at the distant shores of a country far across the sea includes the entire world in the circle. And I won't even mention the howling of orphans that rises up to the throne of God and beyond, making a circle with no end and no God. So if you'll clap for anyone, clap for Yehuda Amichai. And I appreciate you having me here. It's an honor. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I know you all have places to go and things to do. I guess the last thing I would say is I've talked about some difficult things and all that, but I honor your service, and I look forward to you. Your generation has a lot of BS thrown on its shoulders, to be honest, much more than my generation when I was your age. And I know that you will rise to the occasion, and the 2 generations after you are going to look to you, men and women, for guidance and leadership. Thank you for that. Thank you. Have a good night.